Welcome to another edition of The Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Leslie Zane, author of The Power of Instinct. Leslie, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. This is going to be fun.
Oh, I really love the book. And it's a book that you've got to read not once, but a couple times to get all the great information that's in there. So, Leslie, let's start off with you telling us about your professional career. How did you get to where you are right now?
Well, I went to some schools that you might have heard of. I went to Yale undergraduate and Harvard Business School for my MBA. And in between those things, I worked at Bain& Company. That was my very first job. So I kind of have the mind of a consultant. And I was super interested in consumer work and consumer psychology and consumer decision making. So I went into brand management for many years. I was at places like P&G and Johnson & Johnson. And I found when I was at these companies that I thought I was going to a place where they understood everything about marketing. Here I was, the blue chip marketing capital of the universe, P&G. They're certainly going to know how to make marketing the engine of growth. And what I found little by little was that actually nobody knows. Nobody knows how to consistently drive growth on a business or a brand. And we know much less about marketing than we think. And so I set out in 1995 to start my own firm to crack the code on business and brand growth. And that's what we did. And that's what I'm sharing in my book.
So, why did you write this book?
I wrote it because marketing is upside down. Marketing is being done the wrong way. Marketers, all of us, because really everybody's a marketer. We're all marketers in some way. Everybody here is trying to sell something. We are trying to persuade the conscious mind to do what we want it to do. We persuade, we cajole, we use promotional techniques like coupons and discounts. We try all these different mechanisms to try to get people to change their brand behavior and buy the brands that we want them to buy or buy our products and services. And the fact is that persuasion and all those techniques run up against the conscious mind, which is resistant to change and rigid and skeptical and doesn't want to do what you tell it to do. Human beings are literally unpersuadable. What I learned is that you can go around the conscious brain, bypass it altogether to reach people's instincts, to reach their instinctive mind, which, as it turns out, exerts the much greater influence on our decisions. And when you use that approach, it's much more malleable and you can make change faster.
I was reading, and I hope I got this right. Why did you name your company Growth Triggers?
The name of the company is Triggers, and Growth Triggers is a particular type of trigger. But I named it Triggers because the idea behind Triggers is that we have these cognitive shortcuts that work super fast to change people's minds at an accelerated pace. And I wanted my company to basically help clients and companies enable them to change people's minds at the speed of instinct. And I thought that trigger, that kind of spark, would convey that.
Why can't people be persuaded by facts, and why is the traditional market conscious approach dead?
So only about 5% of our decisions are made with the conscious mind. 95% of our decisions are made with the unconscious or instinctive mind. And you know this when you see somebody walk into a supermarket. They, reach for their go-to brands. They stick them in their cart. They buy their 10 products. They stick them in the cart and they walk out. They're not sitting there weighing back and forth. Should I buy this brand or that brand? All these benefits, those benefits. None of that's happening. They have their go-to brand and they are on autopilot. I kind of think of it as sleep shopping. That is instinctive brand preference. And it turns out that is what drives the lion's share of all the decisions we make, pretty much about everything. So it's true about brands, but it's also true about voting. It's true about politics. It's true about the social causes we believe in. It's true about deciding whether or not you're going to get a vaccine. All of our decisions are made on instinct. And that is really the mechanism that we need to tap into. And conscious marketing is dead because it's just not how the brain works. The rules of marketing were created 50, 60 years ago when we thought the conscious mind controlled our decisions. But now we know from science and neuroscience and behavioral science that it's the instinctive mind that makes our decisions. So we need a whole new set of rules. And that is what I'm providing in the book 10 new rules that enable you to change to change behavior and business growth much faster.
Can you just quickly tell us those 10 rules, just basically?
Oh my goodness. Well, if I tell you all the rules today, nobody's
Uh,
going to read the book.
well,
But
they still have to read
I'll,
it for sure.
I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll give you a
Sounds
couple
good.
of examples. Let's take the first rule. You are taught when you are a marketer, one of the very first things that you learn, and it's also just second nature. I think everybody has become, as I said, a marketer and knows this, that you should stand out. You should be the purple cow. You need to be breakthrough. You need to create something from Mars that's going to grab people's attention, differentiate, or die. There's a problem with this. The human brain is hardwired to connect with the familiar, not with the unique. So, actually, when we do unique things in branding and marketing, we're actually pushing people away. That's how the brain works. It connects with the familiar, it rejects the unique. And so the new rule is familiarity is more powerful than uniqueness, and distinctiveness is best of all. And a good example of distinctiveness would be, let's take a snow-capped mountain in the bottled water category. That's a very familiar cue. We know what that is, and we also know what it means. Pure, pristine, eco-friendly, water from the glaciers, untouched by human hands, all these positive associations. So that's a familiar thing. And if I take that snow-capped mountain and I render it in an abstract design with a nice little sunset in the, right under the peak of the mountain, and I put that on my bottled water, now I have created a distinctive version of the familiar, or a creative twist on the familiar, and you're golden, because now the brand can own all those existing neural pathways that are so positive about the snow-capped mountain.
What's the conscious persuasion model that you talk about, and how does that work?
Well, so the conscious persuasion model, which is how most marketing is still done today, is that we barrage people with messages, we use all manner of promotional incentives, and we basically try to convince, cajole, and throttle people into doing what we want them to do. And that doesn't work because the conscious mind is rigid, it's resistant to change, it's stubborn, it thinks it knows best, and it pushes you away. So the conscious model, I'm saying, is kind of a waste of time. It's been what we've been practicing as marketers and as business leaders for, umpteen decades, but we need to put that aside because it's just too rigid and resistant to change. It's going to take too long for you to accomplish your goals. I want to help people take the faster route. Think of the conscious mind as the path of greatest resistance to a sale, and the unconscious or instinctive mind as the path of least resistance to a sale, because it's just much more malleable.
Has all that changed since there are so many platforms that are shooting information at us? Unlike when you and I were kids, you were talking about watching Star Trek, and as I did, and you really only had 5 channels on TV and radio, and that was it, essentially. But now we're being fed so much information from internet, TV, radio, your phone, everything. Has that changed this, and people's minds have become more instinctive, where they were maybe influenced by Jack Nicklaus in an ad about a TV, about a car or something?
I think that humans have always made decisions this way on instinct. The human brain is the human brain, but the effects and dynamics and trends that you're talking about have exacerbated the situation, so that with that barrage of messages coming at you, your brain is tuning out and maybe pushing things away even more. And so I think the only route is through the hidden brain. The only route that you can take is through the instinctive mind, where you can get your ideas in there into memory structure, because it's all about memories. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Um, but that's the job that you have to do. You need to penetrate people's memory structure in order to influence their brand choice and their behavior.
Can you explain the term brand connectome? Is that how you pronounce it?
The brand connectome.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, in order to drive change, in order to get people to do what we want them to do, buy our brands, buy our businesses, we need to reach people's instincts. And it turns out that in the human mind, we have memories that influence our brand choice. The brand connectome is the cumulative memories that have gotten glued to a brand in your subconscious over time, some going back as far as childhood. So if it's McDonald's, if it's Burger King, if it's Coke and Pepsi, these are brands that we know for a very long time. And so the connectome is going to be very large. It's going to have a lot of memories attached to it. But you can basically think of a brand as a seed that you plant in the mind, in people's minds, and you keep adding positive associations to that seed. And that's its nutrients. The soil, the water, the sun are the positive associations. As that seed gains those positive associations, it sprouts these pathways and branches, roots. The root system gets laid down. And little by little, that brand turns from a seed into a full grown tree. The moment that your brand connectome, that's what I'm describing here, is physically larger in the brain than your competitor's brand connectome, that's the moment a consumer will switch from the other brand to your brand. So this is a game of growth, physical growth. You have to physically grow your brand in people's minds, because you cannot increase your share of market until you increase your share of mind.
And that's why they talk about mind share. And you explain where mind share really comes from in the book.
Yeah. So, like, think of this as a game of Monopoly. We need to own as many connections as possible in people's minds. Um, we need to own as much physical real estate in the brain as possible. So, like a game of Monopoly, whoever owns the most terrain, the most real estate wins. That is the game that we're all playing. And we all need to be gardeners, nurturing that seed of our brands, our business, our personal brand, our ideas, whatever it is you're trying to sell. Because again, as I said, we're all marketing something, and make that seed sprout more connections. It's a game about how many connections you have in other people's minds to your thing.
What do you mean by when you write creating mental availability?
So mental availability is the recognition of your brand in the moment that you are, searching for something. Does your brand come up? It's an issue of, it's driven by salience. So there are three things that make a brand salient in the mind. One, it needs to be large. It needs to have a large physical footprint in the brain. Two, it needs to be positive, not negative. So you need to have more positive associations than negative ones. And third, you need to have some distinctiveness, not uniqueness, but you need to be distinctive. Large, positive, and clear or distinctive. Those are the three things that make a healthy brand. If your brand has those three things, in the moment that somebody is reaching for a brand, it will be yours. It will be your brand that they reach for. That is mental availability.
But some people, there have been brands over time that were super powerful and then lost their steam. Why does that happen?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we found, and particularly we find this working with legacy brands that have been around a long time, but it could be for a smaller, newer brand too. Brands tend to accumulate some negative associations. And when those negative associations are not removed quickly, when they're not pruned like dead leaves from the tree, little by little, they can consume your tree. You can almost think of this like a virus. If you're not monitoring the negative associations, not in your current customers' minds, but in your growth targets' minds, the people that you're trying to bring over, your growth target, your prospective customers, if they have negative associations, I don't care if you spend $100 million on advertising and marketing, they are not going to come over because they have those negative associations or barriers up. And so our job needs to be to understand, what are those negative associations that my prospective customers have about my brand? Maybe they made it up in their own head. Consumers tend to kind of connect the dots about businesses, and they may have a negative narrative that you're not aware of. Unless you understand what that is, I don't know how you create a strategy. How are you going to create a brand strategy or a marketing strategy if you don't know the negative associations or implicit barriers that your growth target has? You must understand what those are. It's a very empowering when you do, because that's going to be the key to designing your strategy for taking them down and converting them into your franchise.
In the narrative, Anna decides to approach her next presentation as a marketing campaign rather than a data-driven pitch. Could you elaborate on what specific elements or strategies of a marketing campaign she might incorporate to create a more compelling and persuasive narrative for her idea to the executive team? For instance, how she might leverage storytelling, emotional appeal, or visual elements differently to gain buy-in?
Sure, absolutely. So the story of Anna is probably the story of all of us. We work on a project, we write a big presentation, we take it to our boss, and we keep it all very, very quiet, and we don't share anything about it until it's perfect and we've got it all, wrapped up in a nice pretty bow, and then we go to the boss and we expect him to say, "Fantastic, great job, love it." And often that doesn't happen. And the reason that it doesn't happen is because we are not seeding positive associations along the way. So the most important thing about that story about Anna was that she had a failure the first time because she didn't tell anybody about her idea or her presentation or her plan, and the boss had a negative reaction. The second time that she does it, she uses the kinds of techniques that we talk about in the book to build momentum, to build positive associations. She creates a marketing campaign with many influencers throughout the company. She goes to each of them, and she starts to build the brand connectome around her idea so that by the time she gets to the boss, he is already positively biased toward her. So that's the first thing. The second thing that you asked about is the techniques that she uses in the book, in her approach. And what she does is she leverages, as you say, she leverages a story. So she kind of thinks about the sequencing of her presentation in a way that kind of connects with the audience first, and then pulls it through the various ideal first, second, third, fourth, fifth thing that she wants to say. And she also brings in visual cues, these cognitive shortcuts I'm talking about. So for example, it's a story about a cosmetic company. And so she has one of the supermodels running to the top of the mountain to say this brand's going to be number one. and other triggers like that in her approach. So she's basically using all the different techniques in her approach to her boss. And the second time that she goes, it's a huge success because she's done all these things to build this giant connectome where he's sort of he can't say no because his brain is already predisposed to doing that. It becomes instinctive.
The concept of the conscious marketing model is dead and implies a shift away from traditional marketing. Could you explain what constitutes the unconventional route you're advocating for and how instinct and intuition play a role in the new marketing paradigm, especially when some of the practical steps marketers can take to embrace this instinctive approach, which is totally change for them to totally change what they've been traditionally doing? How do they do
Yeah.
that?
So marketing is not going to stop doing what it's doing today in terms of the marketing development. You're still going to conduct some research, you're still going to develop a strategy, you're still going to execute it through all the different platforms, social media, digital, the 360 communications approach. That is not going to change. What's going to change is the inputs to the strategy, the inputs to the diagnosis, the inputs to the strategy, and you're going to enable yourself to supercharge your communications with these growth triggers, which are these cognitive, visual, and verbal shortcuts that enable you to make change much faster. That's really what's changing. It's the inputs and it's the strategy within the strategy. But marketing is not going to stop doing all the key steps that it's doing. So think of it more as a way to complement what you're already doing and take this instinctive approach rather than the conscious approach, which is going to enable you to make change much faster.
Can you provide examples of successful marketing campaigns that have leveraged instinctual approaches rather than data-centric strategies, which I think most marketers are doing today? They're become so numbers driven.
Sure. There are a lot of them. I mean, there aren't as many as there should be. There's many more of the traditional approach. But like the traditional approach would be to barrage people with, coupons and direct mail pieces. That would be the traditional approach. The unconscious approach, an example of that would be, let's say, Gatorade, with its use of celebrity athletes, which we connect with, that are very aspirational. And so you show a celebrity athlete, somebody that everybody already loves, drinking Gatorade, then our brain makes the connection that that brand is for them, because they want to do the same thing that athlete did. And when you show these athletes overcoming these challenges, that the human instinct to achieve, that would be an example of a connection that you, the audience, are going to feel with these codes and cues that the brand is using. They basically, what Gatorade did is it leveraged the fantasy that we all have of being able to overcome the biggest challenges in our lives and in sports, and achieve something remarkable. And so we kind of put ourselves in the shoes of those athletes, and we want a piece of that. We want a piece of that fantasy. So that's operating at the instinctive level, as opposed to spending a lot of time, giving you all the details about ingredients and things like that, which would be more the rational approach.
A question from the audience. Mark Baldino is the founder CEO of Firebot, a suppression product. And he says, we have a product, we can stop residential stovetop fires. Think of a commercial kitchen system only for a home stovetop for $200 and a 10-year battery, year life battery operated, self-contained, will reduce 50%. I know I've noticed a resistance from fire restoration companies and even firefighters. Less the business, less excitement. The question, how do you overcome the fear a product may make their job obsolete?
Well, are you my answer to that would be, are you trying to sell your product to the people who it's going to put out of business, or are you trying to sell the product to other people?
He would be selling the product to home builders, even individuals that have a home, apartment complexes.
Yeah. I don't, I mean, I wouldn't spend, I think of those other people that you mentioned, the firefighters, et cetera. Those are, in a sense, in this case, your competition. And I would be focused on just a very large market of anybody who owns a stove. Anybody who owns a home or apartment with an oven or a stove. The bigger the market you go after, the the more success you're going to have. One of the classic mistakes that many business leaders make is going after too small an audience. If you go after a very small audience, you're going to get a very small return. And nobody that I've ever spoken to ever has enough resources to spend as much on marketing as they would like to. Everybody is resource constrained. Even big companies are resource constrained. So if you have only $1, are you better off putting your $1 against a bigger market or a smaller market? You want to put it against the largest number of people possible. So Mark is saying we target property management.
Yep, and if you don't mind, I'll read you those comments
Yeah,
for you so
yeah,
everybody can hear them.
yeah,
Yeah, so
perfect.
he wants to know about targeting property management companies, but needs recommendations on that.
So are there, so property management people in a city, in the country,
You know,
overall?
I mean, anywhere that there's going to be apartment complexes and people have kitchens. So, you know, I live in Philadelphia. When I'm in Philadelphia, I live in a 500 um, condo complex with 3 towers. And it would be ideal if we all had that over our stoves, right? So that way, because if a fire happens in my condo, it can wipe out an entire floor, an entire tower, conceivably. So I guess
Yeah.
instinctively, how does it, how do you get someone who's maybe all based on numbers, like property managers, who either looking at the numbers or looking at, like, the insurance company says, hey, we would lower your price if you could have these fire suppressions in here, you know, where it may not be an instinctive buy, like how how big a size does it become an instinctive purchase? Is it for just small items, or somebody who's spending millions of dollars? Is instinct drive them as well?
So it's a great question. A lot of people think that B2B buyers, and let's just call the property manager a B2B buyer in a sense, right? That B2B managers, B2B buyers, or even healthcare providers like doctors, that they make decisions purely on numbers and purely on rational factors. And the fact is, they are human. So they have a human mind that works the same way as consumers do. Um, that's not to say you don't need to have some numbers in your story and your marketing. You do, but there are instinctive drivers that you need to discover. The first one that I would suggest is understanding what they believe in general about this whole area, not even just about your product, but start with a shared sentiment, a shared value that they have and you have. So understand what makes them tick. Understand what they are, their almost their philosophy of their job. I'll give you an example. When we worked with dentists, we didn't start by telling them, you know, hi, dentist so and so, you should buy this toothpaste that, you know, we represent. Instead, we started by saying, you know, dentists, you are not repairmen, you are oral care educators. Oh my God. As soon as we said that, they were putty in our hands. That they would buy anything from us at that point, because we had found something of a shared value, we showed that we appreciate what they do, that we understand them, that we're on the same page. You don't want to start by trying to sell. That's confrontational. Selling is not what we need to do here. If anything, we need to be teaching and educating and think of ourselves when we are marketers as educators and teachers. But the very first step I would recommend is understanding what makes them tick, how they think of themselves, and create a create a connection.
This is going back to Anna. You mentioned the failure of Anna's initial presentation due to an over-reliance on facts and figures, and people can overload people on that for sure. What specific elements should she include in her revised presentation to align with an instinct-based approach without losing or not using that data she's worked so hard in developing?
Let me just first say, this is not about throwing data under the bus. Data can be part of the story. It's just that there are these other levers that you also want to use. So I just want to make that clear, because most decisions that people make are not driven by like emotional versus rational. It's the combination of the two that actually makes a sale happen. Um, but I think she's going to want to create a story that sells her vision, but do it in a way that where she's leveraging things that already exist in her audience's mind, which in this case was the CEO of the company that she was talking to. In other words, you need to find things that already exist in people's brains and latch on to those. What doesn't work is you come in with a story with all these foreign things that no one's ever heard of, and it creates discord, cognitive dissonance between you and the target. Instead, what we want to do is find out what already exists in people's minds and latch on to that. That's the path of least resistance. You're basically latching on to different connection points in people's minds and adding your message to those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Could you discuss the concept of unconventional routes in marketing and what some of the examples of these routes are, and how do they cater to an unpersuadable nature of modern consumers?
So one of the key ways is through what we call growth triggers. So growth triggers are these cognitive shortcuts that are packed with positive associations. And growth triggers can be found in every category, and you can create them for every brand. Every brand can have them. So I don't care if you're, McDonald's, a gigantic business, or you're an entrepreneur selling this way to fireproof your oven. There are codes and cues that you can use that already exist in people's minds, and you can latch on to those. And what happens when you do that is it's so packed with positive associations, those codes and cues, because we're going to latch onto things that are positive in people's minds. Then your brand starts to add those to its connectome. And now your brand connectome spreads out. It grows in people's minds. That's basically what we're doing here. We're adding these triggers, which are like the building blocks of brands, to your existing connectome to make your connectome sprout more quickly and more easily. It's like adding fertilizer to the plant, and making it grow from a seedling to a tree, in a much shorter amount of time.
They'd like to know if your book has come out in audio format yet.
Yes, it is available in audio format. Yeah.
Awesome. How can companies foster a culture that encourages and supports instinctual decision-making among their marketing teams, and what changes in an organizational structure or mindset are necessary, especially when these organizations are run by number-focused people?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that are going on today in the Fortune 500 business community, that's sort of the telling us that something big is happening, that this shift is happening. And I would advise that small businesses follow what these big companies are starting to do so that they can have that same kind of success. There's a book out. It's actually a book that's been around quite a while. It's called How Brands Grow. And if you wanted to, you could buy that book and my book at the same time, and you'll like know everything that you need to know about this area, about how to grow businesses faster in the mind. So Byron Sharp is the author of that book, and he has been uh, creating a training program for Fortune 500 companies, and they've gone through this How Brands Grow training, which is all about mental availability, and it's all about leveraging people's instincts. But it's really more the theory of how to do that. My book is the playbook of how you actually implement that in your daily job, in your everyday, how you apply it to your business specifically. So with his book, you'll have more the theory. With my book, you'll have the practical application, the 10 rules for how to implement it. And you'll have that sort of perfect combination. But what you're really bringing up is a mindset change, Mark, and it's a really good question, because most of us have grown up on traditional marketing. But I believe that the fact that this training program has become much more popular now, and we're seeing a tremendous rise in interest in behavioral science, in these Fortune 500 marketing companies. The shift is definitely happening. It's happening now. I believe that what we're in is what I call the age of instinct, where we understand that all this marketing to the conscious mind that we've been doing is really not getting us where we need to fast enough. Growth is hard. And if you want to get growth faster and more easily, we need to take the path of least resistance, which is through the instinctive mind. Leverage the things that already exist in people's brains, and that is how you make growth happen faster. But it's going to be a mind shift. It's going to be a transformation that's necessary, and it's going to have to happen through education. My company, as an example, has a behavioral science training class that we have created for executives and marketers, and business leaders. So we kind of put people through that, as well as doing, our specific kind of consulting engagements, which are all about helping companies transform to this new way of thinking, which is going to empower them. Because really, once they kind of understand how this works, they can do this on every business, for the rest of their career.
I wonder if a lot of this is driven by a high level of distrust of anything people are seeing. Like it used to be people took face value commercials or somebody endorsed it.
Yeah.
It goes beyond when you and I were born, when doctors were promoting cigarettes and smoking cigarettes. And then we find out later that, hey, they knew all along that cigarettes were cancerous and so forth. So has the instinctive mind taken over, and people are trusting their gut more because they don't trust what they're hearing and seeing?
I think that's fair. I mean, we have a huge fake news problem. Um, but yes, I think that's definitely a factor.
And this is a question from the audience, does instinctive decisioning work differently for food subscriptions? We at Zoom Foods offer a novel restaurant meal subscription service, and we're wondering how to market our new service. Should we focus on convenience or value or both?
So the problem with convenience is that it doesn't suggest that your meals or your approach is high quality. So convenience is a message that's a little bit, I would say, dangerous, because then somebody else can come along and do some, basically knock you off, or another competitor can do the same thing, also offer that convenience, and then suddenly you don't have a business. So I would be spending much more, and I didn't know what you meant by value, if you meant value like low price, or value like perceived value, like high quality, like good value. Um, so I hope it's the latter, because
Mhm.
good value is really what you want to communicate, because otherwise you're playing a price game, and that is going to be ultimately a downward cycle. Over time, it won't be a sustainable business.
I'm wondering, yes, how are you using techniques to market your book and how has that worked out? So, how have you used your own techniques?
So I'm doing what I think everyone else should do, which is really just trying to be everywhere and create more connections to the book in people's minds. And so I've connected with a lot of influencers and book clubs and bookstores, and um, leveraged other people's platforms, going on podcasts. We're going to be making some being on some broadcast shows. So it's just all about making more connections, creating more connections in people's minds about the book and in various places and locations. Because remember, I said that it's all about salience. It's all about creating more connections in the mind. And so that's what we all have to do. And it doesn't matter if it's a book, a brand, a business. Doesn't matter if you're running for president. You have to, do all those same things.
By the way, our founder of Zoom said, by value, I mean more affordable restaurant food that is delivered without delivery fees and tips.
Yeah. So you've got two spokes right now of your message. You've got a convenience message, and you have a sort of low price, good value message. I think you're missing a third spoke to your wheel. Because remember, the brand connectome, it's all about having many connections, many positive associations about your brand or your business. So I would want to have a third message, that's something about the quality of the food, or the fact that the restaurants are excellent restaurants. I don't know enough about your business, so I'm kind of talking out of thin air, but I would be worried about a business that only has a marketing message that's about convenience and low price, because you're setting yourself up to potentially um, be outdone by another company that comes in with a something that focuses much more on the quality of the food. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? And you don't have to choose. It doesn't have to be this message or that message. The idea that a brand should only stand for one thing is another one of the rules that I take down in my book. That's another old marketing adage. A brand should only stand for one thing. If you're Volvo, you should stand for safety. That's a myth, because if I only stand for safety, I'm going to have a very small connectome in people's minds. I'm only going to have that one connection, and I need hundreds of connections. Volvo also needs to stand for great technology, and very advanced and high styling and all these other positive things. So I would suggest that the person who has this Zoom Foods business, that they add some positive associations about the quality of the food and the quality of the restaurants.
Can you talk about the search for Alex Trebek's replacement and why that went badly and what we can learn from this and what would you have recommended to them?
So what you're talking about is one of the stories in the book, which is about Jeopardy. I was fascinated by I think it was like a 6 month or more search for a replacement for Alex Trebek, who unfortunately had contracted cancer and had passed away. And what they did was they kept trying out another star, another celebrity, one right after another on the show. And they thought every time they got a new rating, that rating was about that particular host. And I don't think that's what was going on at all. I think what was going on was that their audience was becoming more and more distanced from the show, because every time they showed a new host, that host was a disconnect between the show that they knew and loved, and the their perceptions of this new person. So it was a disconnect between this new host that came out of left field versus the familiar, which was all their associations about the show. And until they found their last host, which was one of the top performing Jeopardy players, that's when finally they had success and the ratings went back up. And the reason why is because he was already part of the Jeopardy Connectome, and all these other celebrities they were bringing on had nothing to do with Jeopardy. So they weren't already something that existed in people's brains. Make sense?
So let's go to another celebrity that you write about, and maybe you can tell the story and the background on this, and that is Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So Taylor Swift is a sensation. And if you were using the old conventional rule of marketing and you're Taylor Swift, you would tell Taylor Swift, whatever you do, don't stray from country music. Because if you do stray from country music, you're going to turn off your existing customers. They may not like your new sound. Stick to what you know. That would be the old conventional wisdom. But in fact, Taylor Swift did not become a billion-dollar tour, incredibly successful music artist by sticking to one sound. Instead, she branched out to pop music and dance music and folk music and all different types of sounds and music. And she kept exploring her own creative curiosity and branched out to all these different types of music, kind of becoming this mega brand, and really having a mega brand with different types of musical sounds in her brand. And so what I'm saying is that part of why her connectome is so large is because she has not been narrow about going about it. She's had this branching out strategy that we can all learn from. She also doesn't just interact with her fans on a professional basis. She almost creates a personal relationship. So now you've got multiple branches related to different types of music. You've got multiple branches related to personal relationship, professional relationship, almost an intimate connection. I mean, some people think that Taylor Swift is their friend. They dream about her. So all of these connections in the mind have made her mind share grow and grow and grow, to the point that she's now really the most successful star that we've seen since the Beatles in the 60s.
Wow. And that's really saying something, consider all the people in between. Um, you write a brand to succeed, it has to connect on multiple aspects of people's lives and grow in people's minds. Can that be done with any product or service?
Absolutely. It's literally the same thing. You can do it for a brand, a business, a social cause. You could do it for yourself if you were looking for a job. If you think about a job interview, you need to grow your brand in that next half hour meeting that you have with the person on the other side. And you need to grow your seed into a full grown tree in that other person's minds. You've got 30 minutes to do it, 30, from start to go. And so I think you really can use this in any capacity, to increase your success in everything that you do.
Um, can you talk about how M&Ms, I love M&Ms, especially peanut and pretzel M&Ms, has managed to go from a candy to a snack to memory maker? And is there any brand out there that's missing that kind of opportunity that should be able to duplicate it but hasn't?
Yeah, I mean, M&M's has done an amazing job of shifting itself from a candy to a snack. So if you think about the associations with candy, it's going to taste good. It's going to be chocolatey and delicious, but you're not going to let yourself have that many. Whereas a snack is something that's more associated with real food value, And it also has associations of permissibility because of that. So a candy is sort of not permissible, whereas a snack is more permissible because it has some substance. So the strategy that M&M's has been on for the past probably 15 years is adding food value to its M&Ms. It started way back with the peanut variety. Then they added, I don't remember the order, but they added pretzel, they added peanut butter. So they keep putting things that have real food value in their M&Ms. And what they've done by doing so is help to shift that brand to make it more permissible, even though at the end of the day, it really is a candy. But that's not the associations we have with it, because all those things I just mentioned have positive food associations, snack-like associations, peanut butter, um, peanuts, pretzels. Those are things that we think of as snacks and food. So very cleverly, it was able to increase the number of occasions that people would use it with, and grow it to become, this multi-billion-dollar brand.
Yeah, it's very interesting about that. And what has Oprah done that has allowed her to develop a global brand and essentially no negative episodes that I can remember? I mean, nothing that she's done that's turned out to be, catastrophic for her brand. And in fact, I would say she's an icon like Barbara Walters was. Why her, and what can people learn and who want to emulate her?
Great question. So, like Taylor Swift, Oprah, before her, created a very multidimensional brand. So she was a talk show host. She had a magazine. She gave away things to people. So she showed her charitable nature. She was on 60 Minutes. She just keeps expanding her connections to people in a multitude of different ways. And there are probably 30 other things that I haven't mentioned. Um, but what I think is what you can learn from it is add a lot of positive associations on multiple dimensions, and you kind of create a goodwill buffer around your brand, where there are so many positive associations that even if something negative happened, one or two things, they would kind of bounce off you like a force field. And I think that's how we need to think about building brands, especially today where it's easy to make a mistake and kind of get close to the third rail where you do something, almost inadvertently, that can turn people off. So I think it's really important to build your brand very deliberately, build in this sort of protection by adding a lot of positive associations on multiple dimensions, and do all those things, that the kinds of things that Oprah did to help people, to help other parts of the world. Those are things that businesses should be doing anyway, quite frankly. But it'll have a second benefit to you, which is that it'll help you create this very healthy, resilient brand.
You mentioned the catchphrase that Chick-fil-A uses, "My pleasure" over "You're welcome," shows more commitment to the customer. Can you explain that? I'm not sure I understand it. And how should service businesses train employees when responding?
So, what a lot of retail organizations do not understand is that the customer service people in their retail establishment, or even on the phone, if it was a telecommunications center or a call center where, let's say, an insurance company, customers are calling in about their claims, all of these people are part of your brand connectome. The brand is not over here and the people are over there. The customer service people are part of your brand connectome. And it's critical that they have the same values, the same tonality, the same personality as the brand. Otherwise, there's a disconnect. So if you see somebody in a store or at a fast food company, a fast food retail operation, who's in a bad mood, or is acting surly or just doesn't look like they're very happy in their jobs, that colors your impression of the brand itself. And so we don't want that. And I think that if in training we could explain to employees what a fundamental part they are of the success of the brand, and that they're integral in some cases they're the face of the brand, that would, I think, inspire them to realize that they play a really important role and that how they show up is really critical.
You wrote about Folger's campaign, the best part of waking up allowed them to unseat Maxwell House, whose phrase was good until the last drop. You never hear people talk about those companies or see those ads like you used to. I remember they were just so prevalent. It seemed like they were the only two brands that you would look at, maybe Sanka. Uh, can can change of taste or how coffee is delivered be overcome with the right imagery?
So what Folgers figured out at the time was that the aroma of of coffee was just as important as its taste. In fact, aroma was a cue for superior taste. So Maxwell House was just talking about good to the last drop, which was a taste message. Folgers came in and started showing people, opening the can of coffee and sort of breathing in and being transformed by the smell of the coffee alone, which was a cognitive shortcut and a trigger, a growth trigger for taste. So it's a really very good example. But that is an example of imagery. Somebody, being mesmerized by the aroma of coffee, that is an image trigger. And you could use that in your marketing, in your campaign, to set yourself apart from the other brands of coffee. But sure, any brand can use these kinds of techniques today. Even though we've got a Starbucks on every corner, Starbucks could do this, and any one of those brands I just mentioned, Maxwell House and Folgers, could have a renaissance and revitalize their brands by using the right imagery, the right codes and cues, and the right growth triggers.
Which influence do you think will have which influencers do you think have will influence and have a real impact and why?
So, one of the most common types of influencers are celebrities, because they're aspirational, because as humans, we want the fantasy. We want to live, we're fascinated by their lives. We want to know more about their lives. But a lot of the data out there is showing that you can create influencers in other ways. You can create distinctive brand assets, as an example. So an example of a distinctive brand asset would be the Geico gecko or the Aflac goose or duck. Um, you can use those kinds of distinctive brand assets to also act as an influencer. And then, of course, there are the media influencers, on all the social media influencers, and those are fantastic to connect with because they have these loyal followings, and they create a halo over your brand as well. But all of those approaches are things that should be considered as potential pathways to building your brand faster.
I guess this is our last question, and we almost went through all our questions. Um, please talk about the Madoff effect and what we could learn from it.
So, in most of the book, 95% of the book, I talk about all the positive usages of my approach of leveraging the instinctive mind. But I wanted to also cover the potential negative use that could be harmful to people so that they could watch out for it. The Madoff effect is essentially connecting with all of these positive triggers, but using it for a nefarious goal, which is to take people's money, and steal it from them, and render them render their reserves, their cash reserves, take them down to zero. We don't want that to happen to people. So what he did was he leveraged the fantasy, and he had a bunch of different triggers that I describe in the book. And people because people do not do a lot of research and because people do make decisions on instinct, they were moved by his techniques. And he had a very long marketing campaign, years of building up trust through these various triggers and techniques that he was using. And so, my word of caution is, just be careful. Use these techniques for good, and just watch out if somebody tries to use them on you for ill purpose.
Leslie, the hour went way too fast. And I thoroughly enjoyed your book, and I think everybody really got a lot out of what you said today. And so I know you think about, man, that's a lot of work to do a book like this, and it is. But we hope you'll do another one in a couple years after you've brought this one to bestseller
After I
status.
recover from this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Thanks to your listeners and your audience for all their great questions. They were fabulous. And I wish everybody the best of luck. Definitely do buy the book. There's a lot more juicy tidbits. And I'm basically sharing my 30 years of what I've learned with the rest of the world. So please do that. Link with me on LinkedIn. And you can find the book in pre-sale on Amazon right now. It's a pleasure being here with you. Thanks so much for having
I'll
me.
make sure everybody gets your link for LinkedIn. Have a good one. Take care. Everybody have a good weekend. See you next week.